This is an example of some data and also its display as a line graph. And what I want to do is just quickly show you how I made this graph, and then also some things to be aware of and be cautious of when you're looking at the scale and the areas shown on this display. Alright, so first of all, to make this graph, all you really have to do is just select your data, and then up in the Insert tab, you can choose a line chart. Okay, so I just went with a 2D one. And then I just went through the process of adding a few labels for the year and for the percent, and then I changed the title on the chart here. Another thing I did is add these little point markers. Okay, so if you click on the line here, it will show up, with little highlights where the data points are. And you can just go over to the formatting options for marker options, and right now it's selected with none. If you change that to automatic, it will base the style of markers on the style of the chart, or you can choose some of the built-in options if you'd rather see a square, for example, or a triangle or something like that. Alright, so those are the changes that I made. One thing that's helpful to know is to not label the years here if you just want these to show up on the axis. If you actually write year here, it tries to make that another type of data that gets plotted on the chart. So it's better to just leave that blank. Okay, I've made a copy of the chart here so that we can play around with some changes. On the left, you'll see that the vertical axis scale goes from 0 to 60 by tens. And if you play around with that, you can actually make this graph look quite different. So one thing that you could do is start with the lowest data point. So rather than starting with 0, we could start with 30. Right, so if you click on the numbers there, okay, and then over in the formatting options, okay, we can go to the axis options, and for the axis where we see 0 to 60, we could just change that from 30 to 60. All right, and then the units, we're going by tens here. All right, and you can see now that the changes look a bit more dramatic because these lines are steeper. All right. Similarly, if I change this to run from 0 to 100%, okay, well now the changes don't look as drastic. All right, so it just depends on what you're trying to highlight on this chart. If I wanted to see what percent of all college students are women, perhaps I would go from 0 to 100 to kind of highlight the fact that the percent of women is still hovering kind of around this midway point. However, if we're interested more in the changes in just the percentages of women over time, then maybe we zoom in on the graph something like this, either from 0 to 60 or 30 to 60, if we just want to see those changes year to year, and we don't necessarily care about the relationship between the percentage of women compared to the total number of college students. One other thing you can do to make this graph look different without actually changing the scale there, if you just literally click on the graph and drag to resize it, okay, you can play around with this and sort of, oops, let me move this one down. Okay, you can make this look, steeper or less steep just by changing, clicking and dragging here and resizing the graph. All right, so be aware of how that affects your perception of this data.